guess what?
What?
The college football playoff rankings are back. Yeah.
Oh, it's back. That's right. Yeah.
Little CFB playoff rankings, huh? Screw you, AP Top 25. You can kiss our collective asses. And now we've got ourselves some actual legitimate ranking conversation that we can have. And let's first start things off with congratulations to the Tennessee Volunteers. They are your number one team in the country, and they will be the number one team in the country for like another 4 days. And then after that, when they lose to Georgia, all is not, and then Tennessee, we'll see where things sort out for them moving forward. But nonetheless, Tennessee, your number one team in the country. Mr. Big Noon Kickoff, are you okay with Tennessee and the Volunteers being number one? How we feel
why
about
not?
that?
They've got arguably the best win, beating Alabama. I think that kind of says enough right now as it currently stands. And look, I think what this sets up for, because this is what the College Football Playoff Committee does. I don't care really where some teams are ranked, to be quite honest with you. What they're trying to show you is, all right, how many teams from that conference are ranked? They're giving you an idea of what they think of that conference. And then they let the schedule play out to essentially help make some of the decisions they have to make. For example, why is Tennessee number one right now? They have the best win of the season so far. They beat Alabama. So why not put them at number one? And in the event that they do lose to Georgia in Athens this week, you could drop them down to probably 5. And guess what happens at the end of the season? If Tennessee runs the table and you have, any issues with sending Clemson, depending on how the rest of their season goes, or anyone else, it sets up Tennessee to be that non-division winning, non-conference winning team to still make it from the SEC into the playoff. So that's really what this is setting up to be right now as it currently stands.
Reese Davis pointed out during the reveal last night on ESPN, he said there's only been one team since the rankings came out, the playoff rankings, that started off number one and never made it. And it was Mississippi State with Dak Prescott. They're in a good spot here. Also, look, if Alabama wins out, they're going to the college football playoffs. Like that's the way this works.
A one-loss SEC champ is going to the college football playoff. Yeah. That's what you're saying right now.
Michigan being 5 and Clemson 4. What is really behind? Is that just the non-conference schedule? It felt like last night they kind of took away the eye test. And they'll use that when they need to go there, when they need to justify another decision they make later on in some reveal coming up in maybe a couple weeks or the final rankings. But last night felt like they were going to reward the people who played the toughest schedule early. And maybe that things change, like I said, in a couple weeks from now. But it did feel like maybe Michigan was punished. Although you look at Clemson, and has Clemson really beat anybody that impressive?
That's really what stands out to me is when you look at a team like Clemson, for example. And here's the thing, going back to the initial statement, the ACC has 5 ranked teams right now. I don't necessarily understand why NC State is ranked, or even Wake for that matter. Both those teams have 2 losses. Wake looked awful last week versus Louisville in turning the football over 8 times. 8 times in a game and got smoked. NC State starter at quarterback Devin Leary's out, and they went to Jack Chambers to start last week, but then he didn't play well, so then MJ Morris comes in. Yes, they get the win, but Virginia Tech had no business hanging around in that game as a 2-touchdown underdog. So that's another team that when I look at the whole of the ACC, and you even look how it's kind of backloaded, like Syracuse, for example, 2 losses right up there with them. They just got drugged through a Notre Dame team, and now they got to play Pitt that I think might do the exact same thing to them. So it might be a 1-week thing for Syracuse before they drop out. The only other team you look at is North Carolina, and they could put up a lot of points. But even as a 1-loss team, they just play a weak schedule. So as you go through the ACC, to me, it's the weakest of the Power 5 conferences in regards to, how really good or how much depth they have. And I think the Clemson brand is what's carrying them right now, not even necessarily their schedule. Like, I look at that win over Wake and NC State, and they don't look like that great of wins, or even Syracuse for that matter, when Clemson has struggled. So that's one that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. We could pick various teams, right? Like, who is USC beat?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously. The only ranked team they had on their schedule they lost to, which was Utah. They struggled versus Oregon State and Arizona. I know Oregon State's ranked now. We'll see if that ends up being the case at the end of the season. And then LSU, they have no business being a top 10 team just because they've played well the past couple of weeks. That's another team you could throw into that conversation after they got pounded by FSU to start out the year and blown out by Tennessee. They beat Ole Miss, so they're ranked in the top 10. That's another one that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it does give Alabama a much better win because they play LSU this week if they're able to take care of business against LSU.
Does TCU have the best resume?
Right now, and then you look at the ranked 7th. You put that resume for Bama or I just put it this way. If they're an SEC team, they're in the top 4. You could switch them with Clemson right now if they had SEC conference over top of their title or whoever else.
They beat 18, 19, 8, and 17 in consecutive weeks. I mean, that's tough to argue anybody else at that point. And then it looks like. So they've got Texas Tech. They're at Texas. That'll be a tough game. And at Baylor, that could be a little dicey. And then they've got Iowa State. I mean, if TCU runs the table. And I wonder where they get factored. But this is why the expansion of the college football playoff ranking or college football playoffs is going to be a lot of fun because people can look at this and say, well, what are you going to throw TCU? Like they really have a shot at winning a national title. But it's not about whether or not they have a shot. It's about giving them a shot. Just give them an opportunity and let's see how this whole thing plays out. But I like that there was some new blood that was thrown in there, Tennessee and TCU and all that. I just was a little bit surprised that TCU didn't get more love being higher up on the rankings.
I'll put it this way. From watching TCU as compared to the teams that are ahead of them, Michigan, Bama, those two teams look more like complete teams. Like when I watch their defense, TCU has been coming back from some second half deficits. I mean, they're balanced on offense, right? They run well with Kendra Miller. Max Duggan's had a great year. Quentin Johnston is one of the best, wide receivers in all of college football. Tay Barber's got a lot of speed too. Davis as well. The problem is their defense. They're ranked, I think, going into last week, they're like 90th in the country in total defense. I mean, they're having to overcome a lot of deficits at times and win in shootouts, which is hard and it's not overly sustainable. That being said, I would still have them, based on their resume, ranked higher than Clemson. Clemson's the one team I look at and just go, they feel the most fraudulent of all of them, despite their win on the road versus Wake Forest or NC State, because I just look at the ACC and I think it's a much weaker conference in comparison to the other Power 5 right now. So
Tennessee is minus money on DraftKings to make the college football playoff. It's actually minus 115 in either direction for Tennessee. And then you look, Ohio State's a minus 650. I think that's, a clear indication that people feel like Ohio State's going to beat Michigan. And then you've got Clemson, who's almost a 2-1 to make the playoffs now based on all that. And Alabama's sitting at a plus 140.
That's the thing. It sets up for TCU to win the Big 12 and not get in.
Plus 700 to get into the playoff, according to DraftKings.
That's the tough part about this initial ranking. That's why I kind of go back to they give you an idea of what they think about that conference. The Big 12 conference only has 4 teams in the top 25, which, granted, they're a smaller conference. They only have 10 teams in total, so it's a bit unfair to look at it that way. But you'd have to say top to bottom, and when you include the unranked teams, that conference has as much parity as anyone. Like, name another conference where there could be an upset any given week. Maybe the Pac-12 that has 5 ranked teams. But, I look at the Big 12 and just say it's unfortunate because they're putting them on the back burner. They really are, when it's all said and done. They're putting the committee in a tough spot where if TCU runs the table, they're 13-0, they're a Big 12 champ. I'm looking at who's ahead of them, and I'm wondering, well, you're not jumping them over Bama if Bama wins the SEC, and what happens if Georgia's only loss is to Alabama in the SEC championship game?
And that's why.
And by the way, that's assuming they beat Tennessee, which I think they would leapfrog them up to number 1 at that point.
Yes.
So, they're really setting it up to get 2 SEC teams in based on how the current rankings are.
All right, so let's piss off an entire region of the country here. That would be a Big 12 country. All right, so let's just put it. So SEC champ is getting in. Big 10 champ is getting in. If Georgia loses in the SEC championship game to Alabama, they're getting in. So that's 3. And then you would assume, based on these initial projections, we're going to get Clemson in.
Right.
Yeah, there's no way in for TCU. Yeah, there's. I'm trying to, unless there's just a bunch of losses and teams just fall apart, or if Tennessee beats Georgia, and I don't see a way for TCU in. It's unfortunate, but
here's what they need. They need to run the table, right? Which they're capable of doing. It's not easy, but they're capable of doing it. And then they need Clemson to be a one-loss ACC champ. Right, they need Clemson to lose a game down the stretch, whether it's this week versus Notre Dame at Notre Dame, Louisville, Miami, South Carolina, whoever it is down the stretch. They need them to be a one-loss conference champ, and I think that's the one thing that opens the door. They're not getting in over the SEC champ, obviously, or Big Ten champ, obviously. But I think where it makes a better case for them to be a part of it is if they can then have a resume that stands undefeated Power 5 champ and force the committee to make a decision between that, Clemson as a one-loss ACC champ, and then whoever ends up not winning between Georgia and Tennessee, I would say this week probably, because obviously the winner's going to go on to the SEC championship game. And so then you've got to decide between whoever loses that game and then whoever loses, well, I guess this week, right, between Tennessee and Georgia. Those are all the teams that you're really contemplating at this point. But like I said, I think the SEC is getting at least 2 in as it looks right now.
Yeah, it's going to be look, this stuff is so much fun, man. Just the what ifs and what could possibly happen. And also, look, the committee knows it's a TV show too. Like, let's maybe finagle some of the numbers, put a team here, put a team there, let people get up in arms. But if you're in Tennessee, if you're listening on our great affiliates there in this great state of Tennessee, and you're celebrating your volunteers, listen, celebrate while you can, because you're close to double-digit underdogs at Georgia this weekend, and then it doesn't look all that hot for you this weekend, but potentially maybe Tennessee gets it done and even solidifies themselves their opportunity to go to the playoff even more. So that'll be fun. By the way, how you feeling about Notre Dame Clemson this weekend? What are we thinking, huh?
I feel good about it. I feel like Notre Dame right now has to play a certain style of game in order to win. Their special teams have to be special. They've been blocking punts now in consecutive weeks. They've got to be able to run the football, which they've demonstrated the ability to do so. And their defense has to be able to limit some of the big plays and shut down the rushing attack, in particular of Clemson, because Will Shipley's a stud, and then DJ Uiagalelei will obviously play a portion in that. But that's the game plan. It's fairly simple for both sides. It's just now the execution of how they go about doing it.